In this module, we will look at the logging and monitoring aspect of the unit. Since you are implementing a security solution, it is important to be able to properly keep an eye on the FortiGate unit's operation. It is vital to have this aspect of your configuration set up properly and for you to be able to read the output. Otherwise, the FortiGate unit will operate as per its set configuration, and once issues are encountered, the proper logging will not be there to help find out clues to what may be happening or why. Some of the topics we'll be covering include going over the different severity levels, possible log storage locations, different kinds of logs, the structure of the logs and behavior, the traffic log, how to view log messages as well as how to read them, setting up alert emails, and a lot more. By the end of this module, you'll know what the overall purpose of different types of logs are, be able to identify logs that are stored, navigate through various screens in the GUI to do logging and monitoring, read the log messages to obtain information, and set up filters. Logs can help you monitor your network traffic levels, track down problems, establish baselines, and a lot more. Some organizations even have legal requirements when it comes to logging. It would probably not be practical to block other administrators from making changes to your FortiGate unit. When changes are made, however, you would want to know about it. Log files can tell you what someone did or what is happening on the device so that you can make adjustments if you need to. Depending on the log entry, it will have a different level. The levels range in order of importance from debug to emergency. Debug will put additional information into the event log and is worthless unless you are actively investigating something. Obviously, these additional logs will require additional resources to create. Generally, the lowest level is to use information. Debug is only needed to log diagnostic data and will put more strain on the CPU resources. Who decides what needs to be logged? You do. Well, let's be honest. Your business requirements dictate what kind of activity needs to be logged. Logs can be stored in a variety of places, both on and off the device. Locally, you have memory, and many devices have a built-in hard drive. Externally, you may have syslog servers, FortiCloud, SNMP, or a FortiAnalyzer device. A FortiAnalyzer or FortiManager is just an IP for the FortiGate to communicate with. It can be within the same network or not. The FortiAnalyzer or FortiManager has a list of devices that it will allow to communicate with. So long as the FortiGate has properly registered, the FortiAnalyzer or FortiManager will accept incoming logs. Communication between the two devices is done via SSL encrypted OFTP traffic. When a log message is generated, it can be safely transmitted across an unsecure network. In terms of logging, configuring the FortiGate to use a FortiAnalyzer or FortiManager is absolutely identical. The difference is when you compare their capabilities. They can both take log entries, but a FortiManager's primary purpose is to centrally manage multiple FortiGate devices. As such, it has a limit imposed on the amount of logs it can receive in a day. What you can do with the logs that have been received on a FortiManager is no different than what you can do with a FortiAnalyzer. Configuring logging to a FortiAnalyzer or FortiManager is the same regardless of the device. You can do it in the GUI under Log and Report, Log Config, Log Setting. If you go into the CLI, you can configure up to 3 separate FortiAnalyzer or FortiManager devices. The option in the GUI only relates to the CLI equivalent config log FortiAnalyzer setting and not numbers 2 or 3. You may need a setup like this for redundancy or some other requirement. Keep in mind that generating logs requires resources. How much sending to multiple locations like this will impact your resources depends on how many logs you're creating. Another external logging option is to use FortiCloud. This is a subscription service offered by Fortinet that offers long-term storage of logs and reporting functionality. It's a similar idea to FortiAnalyzer, but meant more for a smaller setup where purchasing a dedicated appliance isn't feasible. Every FortiGate comes with a free 1-month trial. All you need to do is activate it from the GUI and link it to your FortiCare user and start sending logs. Be sure to read any documentation on the website if you are considering this option. On the FortiGate, all the logs are split up into 3 different types. You have your traffic log, your event log, and your security log. They are each split up into subtypes. Traffic log contains forward, local, and invalid. The forward log contains information about traffic that was accepted or rejected by a firewall policy. Local traffic is traffic directly to or from the FortiGate, logging into the GUI, FortiGuard queries, those type of things. Invalid packets are the ones the FortiGate unit throws away before they even get to a firewall policy. Within the event log, there are a bunch of subtypes. System event are things that relate to system operations. Automatic updates of the AV IPS definitions, people logging into the GUI, router, VPN, user, etc. These all contain log entries related to that feature. Router would contain BGP or RIP log entries. VPN would contain IPsec and SSL VPN log entries. User would contain log-on, log-off events for people hitting firewall policies, that sort of thing. Finally, there are the subtypes for security logs. Every security profile will create log entries of that type. Antivirus, web filter, etc. This section will only show up if logs have been created within it. When you check the log and report section of the FortiGate GUI, you will see the 3 sections for logs. They correspond to the 3 different types of logs. The traffic log logs events about packets. Event logs keep a record about things like admin users making changes to the configuration. Security logs come from security profiles being activated on your firewall policies. By default, most of the security events will show up in your forward traffic log. This is for performance reasons, as fewer log files are easier to maintain than more. The exception to this is DLP and intrusion scanning. Events for these always show up in the security log section. Some of the profiles can be modified in the CLI in order to obtain additional log options. If you go into the CLI of an antivirus, web filter, email profile, you'll find an option called UTM-extended-log. If you enable it, then some additional logging options will be available to you in the CLI. In addition to that, security events from the profile will now show up in their own section under security logs. This is just a chart to show what the expected behavior will be when you enable different logging options. This first column is for the log setting of the firewall policy. This second column is if an antivirus, web filter, email security profile is enabled. As the previous slide showed, DLP and IPS profiles always generate logs in the security log section. The third column is for that CLI option discussed on the previous page, extended-UTM-log. If you have any profiles enabled on your policy and logging is not enabled on the policy, then you will not get logs of any kind, even if the profile was configured to block the traffic. So if you apply a security profile, it's important to remember to consider this setting. The following shows the FortiGate unit's GUI when you are inspecting the logs. In the Windows upper right corner, you have the option to switch between viewing the logs from different locations if the FortiGate is set up to log to multiple locations. having your firewall configured to actively inspect your traffic and not make a log entry about it is not recommended. You can also set up various filtering for the logs so that you see specifically what you need as opposed to being confronted by a massive wall of log entries. The more information you can specify in the filter, the easier it will be to find the precise log entry you are looking for. Filters are configured for each column of data that you will choose to display. By default, only a subset of the information is displayed in the GUI. More can easily be added in order to make finding the data you need easier. The overall layout for a log message is that it has two sections, a header and a body. The header will have the same layout for every log type and subtype message. The body will change from one type of log message to another. This is because there is some data that will be common to all logs, like a date and time, while the type of event that's being logged will dramatically change what needs to be recorded. This is an example of a raw log entry. As you have seen, the GUI produces a more structured view of the log entry, making it much easier for someone to read. The severity level of the log is located in this level field. If you log to a third-party device, such as a syslog server, you will need to know how to set up your filters in order to find what you need. You can find a document that contains all the logs and their layouts from the Fortinet Docs website at docs.fortinet.com. The header can be used to identify when the log was made, what type of log it is, the level, and so on. These attributes that are common to every log are located in the header. It could just as easily have been a traffic or event log, but then the type and subtype fields within the header would have been different. Obviously, if it had been a different type, the information contained within the body would have been a different format as well. The body can be used to get the specifics of the log message and what actually happened. The value, indicated by policy ID field, which is 100 in this case, shows which firewall rule was used. Since the administrator should know their configuration, this should provide them with useful information about the traffic, since it will point them to the policy that this traffic passed through. Also important to see in the log is the action taken by the FortiGate unit when it encountered this traffic. We can see here that the status is deny, which means the FortiGate prevented this particular piece of traffic from passing. Rather than look at the logs from the GUI, you can also display log messages from the CLI. This allows you to set up a number of filters on the logs that are displayed and capture the output to a file and send it via the options you specify, such as FTP. Alert emails are like getting a paging alert. The idea is that if you are not physically on the device, you may want to get notified about certain things so that you can fix them, hopefully before anyone realizes there was even a problem. Alert emails are set up similar to any log device. First, you decide what is going in them, a filter, and then where it is going. In order to set up an alert email, the first thing you need to do is configure an SMTP server that the FortiGate will talk to. If you don't set this up, the alert email option will not show up in the log and config menu. Once you set up an SMTP server, you can configure your alert email settings. Another option that's related to logging is the alert message console. This is a GUI widget. It's a similar idea to alert emails, but messages will show up in the widget when you log into the FortiGate. Events show up as a list like this. Each one can be separately acknowledged, and it won't show up anymore. The idea is that these events are potentially things you should look into. It's good to know that something has occurred, and you should check to confirm it is still working. Once you confirm that the event did not impact anything, you acknowledge it and it gets removed from the list. You can edit the widget in order to set up what sort of events will show up in the widget as alerts, how many alerts it will display, as well as the name of the widget. You can have multiple alert widgets on the dashboard with different names, all displaying different kinds of alerts. Another method of monitoring a FortiGate unit is to use an SNMP device. The MIB files are located on the support website and can be loaded into any SNMP software so that you can set up automatic queries to the unit in order to find out the operational status. They are also downloadable directly from the FortiGate's GUI. You can obtain everything from CPU and memory levels to what the cause was for the last spam detection. A FortiGate device can support SNMP versions 1, 2, and 3. Setting up the necessary SNMP options is fairly straightforward from the GUI. Simply enable and define the service as you would any other SNMP monitor device, and then enable your protocol options and methods of monitoring. What can be monitored with the different options is exactly the same. SNMP version 3 offers some additional security over the previous two versions of the protocol, like traffic encryption and authentication. Setting the overall log settings in the GUI is fairly straightforward. Under Log and Report, Log Config, Log Settings, you can enable different locations you want logs to be stored. You also have the option to adjust the different kind of traffic that will show up in the local traffic log. Finally, you have some GUI options you can adjust. Resolving IPs to host names will require that the FortiGate does DNS lookups for all the IPs. If your DNS is not working or running slowly, this can impact your ability to look through the logs, as the requests will all need to time out. From the CLI, you can configure more options than the GUI. You can set up to 3 separate FortiAnalyzers as well as up to 3 syslog servers, which are options that are not available in the GUI. There is also the ability to set up logging to WebTrends, which is a third-party service. Depending on which option you configure, you'll need to set up different information like the location IP, a username, or something of that nature. The firewall policy itself also has logging options in it. The way it works is that the policy setting is what determines if and when a log message will be generated for traffic passing through that particular firewall policy. The settings you find under Log Settings in the GUI and under Config Log in the CLI determine where the FortiGate will store the log messages it creates. The event log provides all of the system information generated by the FortiGate unit. This may include administrator logins, configuration changes made by administrators, user activity, and daily operations of the device. In your log setting area, you can enable which events you want to log. What you enable for logging depends on what features you are making use of and what information you need to get out of the logs. None of the event logs that are created are caused by traffic passing through firewall policies. VPNs going up and down, routing protocol activity, those sort of things are not caused by anything passing through a firewall policy. One exception might be the user log. This doesn't record information about traffic through firewall policies directly, but it does record user log-on and log-off events on traffic that passes through policies. There is also a daily log monitor section. This will tell you how many logs the unit has generated over time and what type they are. It makes it easier to see where the FortiGate unit is spending the most resources and if any trends are occurring. You can drill down these logs by clicking any of the days in order to get a more detailed look at how many logs were generated. Each function of the FortiGate unit has an equivalent monitor menu item in the GUI. This allows you to take a look and see how at any given moment in time the feature is performing. The security functions have a monitor option like the rest, but you need to enable it from the CLI before it shows up. With a lot of security activity, this could impact your CPU, so it's disabled by default. One example is the Security Profiles Monitoring section. It has subsections for each security feature to highlight recent activity to give you a snapshot of what is happening with that option. Pretty much every menu has this option: VPN, user and device, etc. Another means of monitoring is to use the widgets on the status page. Many of them can be customized to show the same type of information, but in multiple ways. If you click on the little pen in the upper right corner of the widget, you'll be able to adjust any of the available settings for that widget. Some widgets can be added multiple times to the same dashboard. Each instance can display different information. This is just a look at the options available for the Top Sessions widget. By default, there are a number of different dashboards that are available. Each one has a different name with a different collection of widgets set up to provide different types of information. Each user has their own dashboard setup and layout, so if one user deletes a dashboard and rearranges the widgets on the status page, it will in no way impact any of the other users. You can alter a user's permission not to allow them to make changes to their dashboard and use this to restrict their access. There is something in the CLI called a crash log. This is not a place that stores log messages. It's used purely for diagnostics. The FortiGate is like a computer with different processes that handle different things, like DHCP or web filtering, for example. Anytime a process is closed for any reason, the crash log records this as a crash. This way, if there is an abnormal termination of a process, the programmers can look into it and find out the condition that caused it. A normal and fairly common thing to see in the crash log would be entries for scan unit D, which is the process responsible for virus scanning. Anytime the definitions package is updated, that process needs to close down, apply the new package, and restart. It is a normal shutdown, so you will see an entry like what is listed here for scan unit with status equals 0, which indicates it was a normal shutdown with no abnormalities. Now it's time for the labs. The initial lab will have you exploring the GUI of the unit. Exercise 1 deals with the status monitor. Exercise 2 will cover the event log. If you finish the first lab, go ahead and move on to lab number 2.